So here is video 2 to go briefly over one or two things from the first class, but also to look at what is a pivot table, which will give you a head start for next week. So the first thing is we had this problem. Well, a few people had this problem. Most people didn't, but some of the time it could be your data set that's misbehaving. So we can see in this column that we've got a bunch of numbers, or what should be numbers, but they're being considered as text by the machine. And we can see this because they're pushed left. Right, numbers will sit on the right. These are pushed left, so they're considered to be text. And if you select, say, a batch of them, the machine with its automatic calculator will certainly count them for you. It'll tell you there's 5, but it won't add them up. Okay, we'd expect to see if they were numbers. Let's put a column on the right. We'd expect to see something that if we selected these and they were numbers, they'd do a sum for us. However, that's not happening. No. And also, I suspect we probably won't be able to adjust the decimal points because they don't. Whereas here, we're getting decimal points. We could say, please reduce these decimal points, and it would do that because it's dealing with numbers. Here, it's not dealing with numbers. There are two ways I have found so far to fix this. One is quite straightforward. What we'd expect to do is select the column, go to Format and Number, and tell it this is a number. Now, that's already selected, so I don't know why that's not working. But another way is to choose Automatic, and Automatic, for some reason, works. Okay, don't ask me why Automatic works and Number doesn't, but now you can see they've been pushed right. They're being treated as numbers, and so we can do things like add sums or give you an average. Now, another way to do this would be, I'm going to put in extra columns, would be to remove the pound sign. And this is just an example of what functions can do for you. If you have a problem somewhere, there's probably a function that will let you clean up your data. So here we're going to use a function called substitute, and that takes several arguments, several pieces of information. The first one is, what is the cell you want the machine to work on? So we wanted to work on that. What is it that you want to find? And what I wanted to find is a pound sign. And what is it you want to substitute instead of the pound sign? And here I want to substitute nothing. So I'm going to just put in some commas. We could substitute it with question marks if we wanted to. That was helpful. But here we just want to get rid of it. So we're going to substitute this pound sign with nothing. And so we get, I'm not going to take the autofill for now. And so we get the same thing, but without the pound sign. Now I want to apply this myself through all of these. I can double click on this little square in the bottom right, and that should apply the same function, substitute, but adjusting them so that it's talking about the right column. So when it gets here, it says substitute, but it says D3. The next one should say substitute, but D4, and so it adjusts so that we get the right answer. Now that we've gotten rid of the pound sign, we can put another function in, which is called value. And this simply takes what is text and turns it into a number. Now, for it to do that, it has to have only numbers in the cell. So essentially, we're giving it what looks like a number but isn't being treated as. And we're saying, treat this thing as a number. And so we just give it this value here. And now we can see it's been pushed right. In this case, we'll take the autofill, and it's doing the sums, and there we go. So again, how did we do that? Here we have a substitute function. Remove the pound sign. Now once we had just numbers, then we're able to say, we're able to use something called a value function. Okay, so that is two solutions to this problem here. One, by finding a format that works. In our case, automatic did the trick, and the other, we can put it back to automatic now, I think. Automatic, there we go. And in this case, in the other case, we used a substitute, which you can see here, and we used two functions. So that's very fiddly, but the point here really is, if there's something that's not working or not doing, or if you need something done to a big amount of data, there's probably a function out there that'll do it for you. Okay, so that was that small problem that cropped up. If we consider the Liz Truss donations for a minute, most of these questions can be answered by sorting A to Z or Z to A, or by inserting data, create a filter. And once you've done that, you can select things and use the automatic calculator. Other ways you could do this if you wanted to use a function is you could, if you wanted to count, for example, how many people appear here, you could say, I'll put it in capital so it's easier to see, but count A from A2, I believe. There we go, A2 to A23. And it says there are 22. And if we select it, we see it does go from A2, that's right, down to A23, and the calculator says the same thing. So that's simply another function, count A. Why is there an A? Because if you don't have the A, you get a function called count, and that will count numbers. And so in our case here, we don't get any. If we wanted to see that work, we could go, it's giving us suggestions here. We could say equals count A B2 to B23. And so this, count, if we use this function count here, we will get a count of the number of numbers, if that's not confusing. So anyway, that's a small point. That the function count A will count everything, regardless of whether it's numbers or not. Presumably will work. Yeah, it works. Count A works on, because it's A for all. So count all things that you find in here, regardless of what they are. So that's count A. You might want to know, there's a really useful thing. You might want to know, okay, we've got 22 rows here of donors, but how many different donors have we got? We could have donors that donated several times. We could in theory have one donor that donated 22 times, although we can see that's not the case. And so Sheets has a really useful function, which is for some reason not at all easy to do in Excel. I don't know why. And it says count unique. So count the number of different things we have here. Right? So before we just want to know how many things are here. And here we want to say, no, just count essentially how many different people appear. So if you remember this, so count unique, A2 to A23. If you remember this, there was one person here, I can't remember who she was. There she is, Natasha Barnaba. Now she appears twice. So what we have is, we have 22 donors, but we only have 21 unique donors. And so that's the difference between what we're counting here. And so we use equals count unique. For example, if I were to do a count unique on this column, where we have individual, company, it is going to return a value of 2, because there are only two different things in this column, even though there are 22 occasions. All right. If we were to do a count unique here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're all different. They're all different one from the other. We could type it out, or we could just use this little black box at the bottom right and drag our formula over, and it will adjust so that now it deals with column D, not column C, and there are 5 if we do a count unique. So that's count unique. One we mentioned, in my room, is if you want to find out how many individuals or companies there are, you can filter, and then simply say, well, just show me the individuals, and then you can see, well, we'll select them all, and we get a count which is 17. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to say equals COUNTIF, and we wanted to look through the range again, C2 to C23, but count only if you find, for example, company. Oops, in here. And it tells us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we could do the same thing. Okay, 5 is not that hard to count. I mean, you might make a mistake just doing it visually, but if we do it for individual, we've got 17, so that can be really useful. And then there was a question, how much money from companies? So that's something similar, but where do we put it? We put it here. So we want to do a sum. What's the total amount of money donated by companies? And we can say SUMIF, and here you need to look through column C, so C2 to C23. If you find company, then you return a value that you find in B2 to B23. Okay, we'll come back to, okay, 49366 is apparently the amount of money donated by companies. We could check this, we could put a filter on, oops, not there, thank you. We could put a filter, and we could say, just show me the companies, and then we'll select the 5 values, and we get a sum which is 49366. Right, so that's correct. So how did we do that? We had this long complicated syntax. So the function is called SUMIF, and we said look in this batch of cells, C2 to C23, and if you find the word company, include the value that appears in the batch of cells B2 to B23. So that's pretty much as complicated as it gets with functions. But those are examples of some of the things that can be answered. So those were a few functions. Let's have a look at, let's turn off that filter, data, remove filter. And let's answer the same question, but differently. If we go to insert, we have an option to insert a pivot table. And this allows us to reorder all of the data in a direction that we find interesting. All right. So for example, we can filter for individual and company, and then we can do the sums. But it would be nice if we could just say, if we could reorder this data set so that it was classified by individual and company, which is a lot easier to follow if you actually see it done than having it explained. So insert pivot table. When you do this, it will ask you, do you want to put your pivot table in the same sheet that you're looking at, or do you want to have a new sheet where you can put your pivot table? It's almost always a good idea to have a new sheet. So now we have a new sheet, which we can rename, like anything else, just by double clicking on the tab. And then we have this table that we can put together. The easiest way to approach pivot tables, I've found anyway, is to start with rows. And so what you're doing is saying, I'd like all the data organized in such a way that I've got rows of, and what have we got in this? Let's go back and look at it. Rows of the amounts, or the status, or the names. We've already got rows of names. So what I want is rows of status, because there's only 2 different ones. So if we say, give me the rows of status, it's going to have a row for company and a row for individual. And at this point, we can say what we'd like the values, what values we'd like put in. Now, we could simply say, which seems a bit odd, we could say give me the same things, and in which case the only thing it can do is count them, but it will give you a count of how many companies and how many individuals. That's not that interesting. You can adjust. Oh no, we want to put something else in as the values. The obvious values would be the amount, right? So let's put that in. And so you can see that it's given us 49,000 for companies, 374,000 for individuals. We could change this and say, well, give me the average. Right? Oh, more decimal points. So the average donation by company is 9,873. Average donation by individual is 22,000. You know at this stage that you could simply go to data, create a filter for company, and then with these selected, you could see what is the average, 9,873. And that's the same thing that we've got here. Okay, what is 9,873? And what else is offered? We could ask for a median. Okay, now we're not obliged to stop at just one. We could keep a column for the median and add another one. I want another column with values with the amount, but instead of median, I want the average. So now we have a sum of all the money given by companies, and we have the average of all the money given by companies. And you can see it moves really quickly. Another example would be if we went to the Tories donation and we looked at, so again, where do we find this? Insert, pivot table. Do we want it in a new sheet? Yes, we do. And something we could look at, again, we're going to put in some rows. And we're going to take, I'm going to take reporting period now because it's, these are the quarters, I think, the yearly quarters, yeah. It loves to put in a grand total, but you can, down the bottom, but you can remove that by clicking that box. So you can see that in our original data, we've got what, 2021, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 2022, 1 and 2. Oh, and we've got quarter 4 in 2020. So in here, this is a pretty good example. You've got all these different quarters, but it's very tedious. It's not organized in terms of these quarters. If I asked you, well, how much did they give? How much did they take in the second quarter of 2021? You could do that by getting a filter and by selecting the one that interests you, but that's quite slow. If I said out of which of the 4 quarters in 2021 brought in the most money, then that begins to get very laborious. Whereas here, we have all the data rearranged, if you like. It's like they've pulled apart the whole data set and put it back together and done so in terms of quarters. So those are the quarters. The values that interest us would be the value, as in the money. And so now we've got a sum. We know this is a little bit unhelpful because it's not chronological. Sort by reporting period. Yeah, it's because we need to rename these quarter one. We really need to start with 2021. Anyway, we'll leave that problem for now. We can, for example, it's sorted by this, but we could sort it, for example, there's an option here to sort not by the reporting period, which is the first column, but by the sum of value. And so now, and we can have ascending, so it's going from the lowest quarter to the highest, or we could have descending, which is a bit more natural on the eye. So we can see which was the most lucrative quarter, which was the least lucrative quarter. So that was the Tories. We could go to Labour. We could ask the same question. We could say insert pivot table, new sheet, and then we could say show us the quarters in rows. And then we could say give us the amount of money. But we've already done that. So let's look at the data. What else can we do? We've got donor name. There's probably too many of those. We've got donor status. And again, if we go to if we go to data, create a filter, that will give us a rough idea of how many different things are appearing in that column. That's a relatively good number. It's not too big. So what's that called? Donor status. We could go and we could say we don't want the rows to carry the quarter this time, so we'll delete that. We want it to carry the donor status. And so now, we'll get rid of the totals. Now it has taken all those things that appeared under donor status, trade union, company, and it has reorganized all the data so that we're shown immediately what the total sum of the donations made by things that were companies, things that were a friendly society, and so on. Again, we could choose to see the average. We could choose to see which the maximum value for each. So the maximum value for the company is 200,000, but the maximum value for public fund is 567,000. And now, is there anything else we can look for? We could look for donation type. So we could say, let's have donation type. And so now we can see how much each type. Most of it was cash, a lot of it was public funds, and then there's a few odds and ends that aren't cash. Now, if we go back to donor status, again, we'll get rid of donation type. We will add donor status. And so we can see, for example, which I think was a question, how much money came from trade unions. Okay, so that's a quick look at what pivot tables can do. And we'll do more of that next week in class. In the meantime, there might be one question that from last week that'll help with. Otherwise, that's what we'll be using next week when we go back to these data sets and when we move on to other data sets that really need pivot tables.